Okay, let's dive in. Our sources today, they lay out this incredible story. Think about one of the oldest Christian traditions anywhere.
Hmm.
Started way outside the Roman sphere, spread like, well, wildfire across Asia.
Right, a vast history.
Exactly. Now, picture that ancient tradition, that tapestry, splitting. A deep rupture, creating two distinct churches that exist today.
Yeah.
So we're doing a deep dive into that journey, the history, the theology, the points where the Assyrian Church of the East and the Chaldean Catholic Church diverged.
And we've got a good stack of material history, theology, notes on modern talks, too.
Our mission really is to get our heads around how a church with such deep roots could, fracture so significantly and what it all means now.
And those roots, they go incredibly deep. The sources trace the Church of the East right back to apostles like Thomas and Thaddeus.
Seriously, the apostles,
Yeah,
why?
they were operating independently from, say, Antioch,
Yeah.
way back, I think 410 AD.
410,
Yeah.
that's before the big councils everyone knows, like Ephesus or Chalcedon.
Exactly. They declared their own administrative independence very early. Truly autocephalous, self-governing from the get-go, almost.
And their expansion. The sources talk about missionaries reaching India, China, the Shian Stales.
That's the one. Geographically, you could argue they were the largest Christian church in the world at one point, just huge reach.
But that size made them vulnerable, too.
Definitely. The sources really highlight some devastating persecutions. Tamerlane, late 14th century.
Yeah.
Just brutal.
Oof.
Yeah, it forced a massive contraction. They lost huge numbers, huge territories.
Okay, so let's get to the split itself in the 16th century, because this is where our sources say something really key. The immediate trigger, it wasn't mainly about like deep theological arguments.
That's right. It was fundamentally an internal crisis over governance, how the church was run.
Tell us about that. What was the specific issue?
Well, around 1450, this practice started. Hereditary patriarchal succession.
Hereditary, like a king passing down the crown.
Pretty much. The top job, the patriarch, started passing from uncle to nephew within just one family.
Right. And you can imagine the problems that caused, the sources mention abuses, don't they? Like appointing relatives who are way too young or just not fit for the role.
Exactly. This caused huge upset among bishops and clergy who cared about, the proper church rules, the canons.
They saw it as totally out of line.
Completely. Major dissent brewing.
And that dissent became the flashpoint. So 1552, a group says enough's enough.
Right. They get together, they're fed up, and they elect their own rival patriarch, a monk named Johannes Solaka.
But they hit a snag, a canonical problem.
Yeah, according to their tradition, they needed a specific rank of bishop, a metropolitan, to consecrate the new patriarch properly. And they didn't have one available who was on their side.
So Solaka, he takes this extraordinary step.
He does. The sources document this journey. He travels all the way to Rome.
To the Pope, seeking validation from outside his tradition.
Seeking validation, yeah. In 1553, Pope Julius III receives him.
And the Pope's action here is pivotal, isn't it? What did he do?
Well, the Pope consecrated Solaka as a bishop and then proclaimed him patriarch, crucially, in communion with Rome.
And gave him a specific title?
Yes, Patriarch of the Chaldeans. That title itself helped kind of formalize the new reality of this division.
Wow. And then Solaka was martyred shortly after returning.
He was, yeah. And that just hardened the resolve of his followers and strengthened their connection to Rome.
So now you've got these two lines diverging. The original traditional line, the Aliyah line, mostly resisting union with Rome.
Right.
And this new line from Solaka, the Shamoun line, initially pro-Catholic. But the history gets messy again, doesn't it?
Oh, it really does. It's not straightforward. The sources show the Shamoun line, the one started by Solaka.
Yeah.
Well, eventually it broke communion with Rome again.
Seriously, why?
Same old problem, ironically. Hereditary succession popped up again in that line, too.
You're kidding. History repeating itself.
Exactly. And then in another twist, the two original lines, the Aliyah and the later Shamoun line, they eventually reconciled and reunited. That reunion forms the basis of the modern Assyrian Church of the East.
Okay, so while that's happening, what about the pro-Rome group?
Well, a stable union with Rome did eventually take hold, consolidating through other figures who were pro-Catholic. And interestingly, by 1830, the Chaldean Catholic Church was definitively established, led by a patriarch who actually came from the original Aliyah line that had initially resisted Rome.
That's complex. So the split started over governance, but did theology become a bigger issue later?
It did become a more prominent point of discussion and distinction, yeah. Historically, the Assyrian tradition really emphasized the Antiochene way of talking about Christ, stressing the distinction between his divinity and humanity.
Whereas Catholic theology, often drawing more from the Alexandrian school, emphasized the unity more strongly, especially after councils like Chalcedon.
Right. Different emphasis, different terminology developed over centuries of separation. But here's the good news. Dialogue has made huge progress.
The 1994 Declaration.
Exactly. The common Christological declaration between the Catholic Church and the Assyrian Church of the East. A landmark.
What did it say, basically?
Essentially, they recognized that even though they use different historical phrases, like the Assyrian tradition preferring Mother of Christ our God and Savior for Mary versus the Catholic Mother of God, they actually professed the same core faith in who Jesus Christ is.
So, finding common ground beneath the old terminology differences.
Precisely. They also share the ancient East Syrian rite, the basic form of worship. Though there are some liturgical differences noted in the sources leavened versus unleavened bread in communion, for instance.
And there was that interesting point about the main Assyrian Eucharistic prayer, the anaphora of Adai and Mari.
Yeah, its ancient form doesn't explicitly have the words of institution. This is my body.
Which is usually seen as essential in the West.
Right. But in 2001, the Catholic Church actually recognized the validity of that ancient anaphora, even without those specific words, acknowledging its antiquity and context. A big ecumenical step.
So, if the Christology is largely resolved, what's the main difference keeping them apart today?
It really boils down to ecclesiology, the understanding of the Church itself.
Meaning?
The Assyrian Church of the East maintains its ancient autocephaly, its independence, its self-governance. The Chaldean Catholic Church, by definition, is in full communion with Rome and accepts the Pope's universal authority.
And that's the fundamental structural difference, the main sticking point for full unity now.
That's the core issue today, yes. But dialogue continues. They work on theological understanding, practical cooperation.
Like allowing shared communion sometimes.
Under specific, often difficult circumstances, yes. Especially important now, given the shared challenges they face. Persecution, diaspora. These things push them together in practice.
So, wrapping this up, we've traced how this one ancient tradition fractured, not initially over some huge theological war, but triggered by internal governance issues, then shaped by seeking external validation and centuries of separate development.
Right. And while the big historical theological disputes like Christology have seen remarkable convergence through dialogue,
the fundamental difference in how they understand church authority and structure remains. That ecclesiology piece is key.
it is.
Which leaves us with something to think about. In a world where Christians, especially from these ancient Eastern traditions, face so many shared hardships, how do these different views on church governance, on authority and structure, how do they impact the practical call for unity and cooperation? Does it help or does it hinder their shared witness? Something for you to ponder.